It's a great temptation to go at your gardening like a bull at a gate at this time of year. So much to sow, so much to plant, so much to do. But then it gets frosty, and you're forced to just pause and look at the beauty of everything. And it's no bad thing. I seem to be spending all my time at the moment digging up and dividing border perennials. I didn't realise you had so many borders until I started. Dozens of them.
Well, I did some of mine in the autumn because my soil's a bit lighter than it is here.
I used to do that. I was on Bagshot Sand, and you got really good growth by the following spring.
Yeah,
But
you
it's
do.
just too heavy. What's yours like?
I'm a spring man, to be honest. But
Yeah.
I think the most important is just jump in and have a go. You know, don't be frightened. Just go in with a knife or a spade. Just have a go. You
They're
know,
much tougher than you think,
Oh,
aren't they?
absolutely.
You get all that business about two forks. Pa! Most border perennials are fibrous rooted, which means that they don't go down too deeply, but they do make this absolute mat and mattress of roots on the surface of the soil. Some of them are even good looking in winter. This is Phlomis russelliana, which has these whirls of yellow flowers in summer, downy, pale greeny grey leaves. But then, come this time of year, well, come autumn in fact, right through until now, it's got these dry, whiskery seed heads on, and instead of chopping them off, I like to leave them until round about now. We've had a pleasant winter when the frost's on them, absolutely beautiful. But before you do your dividing, just whip them off at ground level. The dog can now see the rabbit, and what you can also see is that classic thing that happens to a lot of border perennials after 3 or 4 years. The very centre of the clump begins to die out because the plant is spreading and moving sideways. You can see the holes. This Phlomis hasn't been shifted for about 4 years, so it's high time it was. And I like to just get a fork underneath these fresh young shoots you can see here, and then tease them apart and transplant them. Now, as we were saying on the way down, you can be quite brutal with these. Here you've got lots and lots of root, a lump of almost like rhizome there, that's pretty old and gnarled. So the thing to do is to look at this fresh end here with a fair proportion of roots, put it down like that, and then, don't be alarmed, take your spade and literally chop. And you then have one new youngster. You can pull the two of these old leaves off. And that can be planted in ground that's been beefed up with a bit of well-rotted compost or manure. Space them a foot to 8 inches apart, and they'll grow away and flower brilliantly even this summer.
I'm going to divide these begonias, which have got a really woody, tough, creeping rhizome system. Begonias are wonderful evergreen clump-forming plants, but they tend to need dividing about every 3 to 5 years to keep them in a peak of health. They've got fantastic plumes of pink flowers in the spring, and of course the leaves are wonderful. They're also called elephant's ears for obvious reasons. So I've just cleaned off as much of the soil as I can from the roots, and you can see there it's a really tough woody rhizome, and I'm just going to chop straight through it. Now I'm going to get rid of this old rhizome here, that's no use to me anymore, and I'm just going to save some of the fresher parts here, keeping the leaves on and a little bit of root, and then just chop. You want to take about 15 centimetres, about 6 inches of that new rhizome. So just cut through it like that. That's a good piece. And I think I might take off some of this larger leaf, because while the new roots are forming, you don't want to put too much strain on the new plant. And then I think I can take another one from here. It's already actually coming away. There we are. And in fact, that might divide down again. I'm going to plant these as soon as possible so the roots don't have a chance to dry out. And you can see on the parent plant that the rhizome's actually sitting just above the surface. That's because as it creeps, they get higher and higher. But I'm going to start them off fairly deep just to help them establish a bit more easily. There we are. 3 new plants, 1 bit of old rhizome.
There can be few more cheerful sights in the garden at this time of year than a good old clump of the common snowdrop. They form wonderful drifts in the lawn and deciduous trees. So it may seem a little strange to be digging it up, but a single bulb can get to the stage where all it's producing is leaves. And in order to inject some vigour back into the clump, we really need to lift, start to divide, which is very straightforward. Just take the clump out and then start to separate into clumps of about 6 to 8 individual bulbs. And you can be quite brutal, you can pull them apart. And it's important to do this at this time of year, when the plant still is in leaf and the flowers are just fading. It's technically known as in the green, but the reason you do it at this time of the year is simply because the bulb doesn't like drying out. So to keep it nice and moist, do it while the bulb is alive, and you're guaranteed of having the bulbs taking. And once you've got them to that stage, you can then replant around the garden. And the important thing to remember is go for a moist soil, so lots of organic matter. Plant about 2.5 times the depth of the bulb, so around about 5 centimetres, something like that. And also, as soon as the foliage comes through next spring, give them a good top dressing of a low nitrogen fertiliser, something like a tomato seed. Actually does the trick rather well. That just encourages them into flower.
Well, if you're thinking of buying an Acer this spring, autumn is a perfect time to see them in their ultimate glory. Even in my own relatively small garden, I've managed to cram in 8 Acers. I'm just mad about maples, and I was hugely influenced by my father, who grew a lot of them in the garden where I was growing up. Even as a child, I remember being mesmerised by the delicacy of the foliage, the vibrancy of the colours, and the sheer beauty of the form. The Mallet Court Nursery here in Somerset has one of the most extensive collections in the country, offering 350 different maples. Of these, 130 are species from all over the world. But on this visit, I'm going to concentrate on the maples from Japan and China. With the help of Ernie Stevens and Paul Coles here at the nursery, I've selected just a few, which I think are stunning examples of this diverse range. This one is Acer palmatum osakazuki, and it's one of the most well-known of the Japanese maples. In the spring, it's got beautiful fresh green foliage, which is just slightly tinged bronze, and that becomes sort of appley green through the summer. And then in the autumn, you get this incredible, really bright, glowing red. It grows to about 4.5, maybe even 5 metres, so it's definitely not a plant for a container, but put it in the border and you just can't go wrong. This stunner is Acer palmatum seriu, which I'm told means cascading water. It's the only member of the Dissectum group to have upright growth. Most of them have a sort of mushroom shape. And these wonderful feathery leaves are going to be bright green in the spring, and then they turn this fantastic deep red in the autumn. It's going to grow to about 4 metres tall. And if you want to get one this size, which is about 13, 14 years old, it's going to set you back nearly £400. But Acers aren't just for the autumn. Some of them have something to offer for every season. And this one, Acer palmatum aoyagi, is a really good example. It's got fresh green foliage in the spring, and that's going to turn to this wonderful butter yellow in the autumn. But the best thing of all are the stems, which are this wonderful appley green. And in fact, the name means green willow. Well, I've got one of these in my own garden. Not one of them, one of these. It's Acer palmatum sangokaku, which means coral tower, and I know that it's truly a plant for all seasons. Now, the name refers predominantly to these stems, which are going to colour up through the winter and become a really intense, fresh coral pink, so that by the early spring they're going to be glistening. And then they're followed, of course, by the new leaves, which are a fresh green with an edge of red to them, and they turn this wonderful soft gold in the autumn. Now this one's got quite a different form with horizontal, almost tiered branches. It's Acer japonicum aconitifolium, and it's got that name because the leaves are reminiscent of those of an aconitum. And it's going to start off a fresh green, and then it colours up through these yellows and golden oranges to become quite red. But don't be deceived by the size, because it's also going to reach about 4.5 metres. To the Japanese, plants symbolise certain qualities, and the gardens are often designed to represent earth, wind and fire. And the growth cycle from germination through to flowering and finally fruiting symbolise man's destiny, with the final falling of leaves in the autumn representing the passing of life itself. Now, if you don't want to plant straight into the ground, acers are fantastic in containers, and I can think of nothing better than a group of pots on the patio with a selection of different shapes, sizes and colours. But you must choose your plant carefully. Either go for one that's fairly slow growing, something like Acer palmatum dissectum red dragon. Just look at the intensity of the colour of the leaves. Or you go for a true dwarf, like this one, which is called Little Princess. It's got these gorgeous diminutive leaves, and the colours are just gorgeous. It may not look like much now, but this one, Sango Kaki, is going to get to be about 15 foot high. That's about 5 metres. So it needs a good start, a good planting hole, and now is the perfect time to do it. I've dug quite a big hole for this little pot because the soil's so heavy, and I think Alan said he's had trouble here with acers, so I'm going to put lots of drainage in there, lots of grit, and that'll really open up the soil. And I've mixed it in with some compost, so I'm going to put a nice dollop of it in the bottom of the hole there, a bit more. I'm just going to fork that in to the bottom of the hole, and I think I'll put a little bit more over here as well in the soil that I've taken out, because that's really going to give it a good start. And fork that in again. I'm just going to check the levels to see that it's not going to go in too deep. That's just about right. So I'll just get it out of the pot. I've got much of a root system. A lot of people think that acers need really acid conditions, but in fact there are very few that won't thrive in neutral soil. So this is going to be fine. What they really don't like is to be exposed. Don't put them somewhere that's really windy. A lot of those fine leaves can get scorched and damaged in high winds. So it's probably not ideal for seaside garden either. I'm just going to firm it with my foot. Quick watering in. Even in wet weather. There we go. It's going to look gorgeous.
You know, the one thing about Gardener's World viewers is that they have memories longer than elephants. And people stop me in the street and they say, you remember about a year ago you planted up your conservatory? Well, we've never been back. Well, you are now. You see how it's getting on. I think you probably thought they'd all died, didn't you? This conservatory, it is double glazed and it's heated to, I guess at night, a minimum of perhaps just under 50. And during the day it gets a bit warmer than that. As a result of which the bananas have really enjoyed life. But you get failures as well as success stories. For every banana, palm and fern that does well, there's one little one that doesn't. This alocasia down here has decided it's not terribly happy, but always investigate closely before you get rid of something completely. Right in the centre of the plant there is a bud, a big fat one and a hard one underneath this crispy coating. So scissor these leaves off and then leave that to grow. If it doesn't come back, I'm not too worried, quite simply because the fern is enjoying life so much now, it's moving across. And it's the right time of year to apply a bit of food to this soil, either in liquid feed form or solid granular fertiliser scrabbled into the surface so that it can get down to the roots and encourage fresh spring growth. Almost all houseplants need what you might call a kick in the pants to get them going at this time of year. They've had a long, hard winter, probably drying out in the house. You can probably get a lot of them by cuttings, but one or two individuals need slightly differing techniques. This is, it's a wonderful Latin name, Sansevieria trifasciata laurentii. mother-in-law's tongue to you. But it's the variegated one with the yellow stripes up the leaves. Now, mother-in-law's tongue you can propagate by cutting into chunks like that and rooting them as leaf cuttings, but you tend to lose the variegation. So if you've got one like this, look down into the pot and you will find these. This is a rhizome, and the whole thing tends to look a bit like a very succulent iris with the shoot coming up here and the rhizome with its roots on below. And what you need to do is to pull that out of the soil. Comes up with a load of roots, then cut it off. Cut off that spare bit of rhizome. It's got no roots attached to it. Take a pot, clay pot for a bit of weight, because it's quite a weighty plant, and then in the bottom of it some Johniness number 1, because the succulence, it's got the capacity of being allowed to dry out without shrinking, which soilless composts do, and it also offers the succulent a bit of weight. It doesn't get too light when it gets dry. That way it keeps these great sails of leaves standing upright if you firm it really well around those roots, and it can allow the important drying out in between waterings. And that's going to grow on and send up more of these shoots and rhizomes until it's eventually as thick as that one is over there. Now, if you thought that was fairly simple propagation, then this is even simpler. This is cyperus, what they used to make paper of, you know, papyrus. Amazing plant, likes boggy soil, and it has the most incredibly complex method of propagation. Knife through stem, take it off like that, get yourself a jar of water, turn it upside down, stick it in the top, and it'll send out roots. Told you it was complicated, and when it's done that, you can pot it up. We'll get out of the warm now, do something in the cold. Oh, good man. Weather last week, so behind with this now. Look at, we've got down as many slabs as we got with frost, snow, rain, sleet.
Well, I just thought it was worth breaking at the bottom actually to help with drainage.
Well, the great thing is one advantage of building the rubble this time is it's there. We should get put a decent topsoil on top of it.
Well, once I've dug it all over, I'll start putting the old topsoil in for you.
Don't look like that in these sacks. Have you ever seen topsoil in sacks before?
Oh, I've never seen that sort of topsoil.
We went round our local builder's merchant and they had the most terrible rubbish there. So I found some topsoil in bags, struck a deal with this guy and said, I'm not paying bag price. Bag topsoil costs fortunes. This is the Fortnum and Mason of the topsoil world. But Pippa's vegetables, you see, what could I do? So if you finish that, I'll split a bit of this on the top.
I'll tell you what, this isn't the only place I've gone to this week. It was up against the deadline. The Eden Project, a futuristic and theatrical exploration of mankind's relationship with plants. It's hard to believe that when Gardeners Ward first visited the site in 1998, this was just a clay pit. Last year the domes were taking shape and 500,000 visitors came to see the progress. A week Saturday, you'll be able to enter Eden for the first time. Prepare to be amazed. Planting in the two biomes is themed by regions of the world, with around 4,000 species represented. In the larger, humid tropic zone, you can visit West Africa, Malaysia, Amazonia and Cornucopia, where there are cash crops of coffee, cocoa and rubber, and everything seems to be thriving. All the plants are in remarkably good condition, so how on earth do you keep them clean of pest and disease?
All our pest control is biological. Biological systems. We use exactly the same as the amateur gardener would use, but then we have a lot of other problems and very big plants where you can't necessarily get to. So things like mealybug and soft shell scale and all the things that you're familiar with on a citrus or something like that, we are going to use Japanese white-eyed finch type birds which flit about in the foliage and feed on these things.
How do you see the whole thing looking in, say, 15, 20 years' time?
Well, the whole thing's going to evolve. In 5 years' time, this canopy will be 20 metres tall.
Really?
In 20 years' time, it'll be 40 metres tall.
Right.
And by 40, 50 years' time, we should be in a state where you could almost say we're going to fell our first teak tree.
As befits such a theatrical project, there's lots of finishing touches to be made before the curtain goes up. And that means plenty of planting.
It's not straight.
It's not straight. Back that way.
Needs to go back and slightly that way as well. Like that? Yeah, that looks just right from here.
And it's very humid in here, so that helps to reduce the amount of watering that you do.
Oh yeah, definitely. To begin with, when we first brought the plants in, the humidification wasn't working, and so then we were continually irrigating the soil, spraying water all over the place. And all the plants then, we put tubes down next to the root ball, so that when we did water, we knew that water was getting right in down where the roots needed it.
Sure.
But now the humidification's come on, the water requirements have just dropped.
Yeah.
They really have. Transpiration so much less.
So you really have given the plant the environment that it would naturally be found in.
Since that humidification came on, they've just greened up and they've just all started growing, and we're just so pleased because we know that they like the atmosphere.
For trivia fans, the Eden project is stuffed full of statistics. The project so far has cost somewhere in the region of £80 million. Over 90,000 tonnes of earth has been created from China clay waste, and the dome behind me will easily house the Tower of London. But this is more than just a green theme park.
A lot of people say, gosh, you must be so proud because it looks this and it looks that. Ultimately, if all it's worth is it's an 90 million pound theme park, it's not worth jack shit. Because actually, if it doesn't change anything, it would have been the most grotesque waste of money. The real test of time is going to be whether we can actually get people excited about the issues we want to address by painting up in a new way and get people involved doing things. I think actions speak very, very much louder than words in this case. So if in 2 or 3 years' time we haven't actually made a difference anywhere, I think we'd have been a failure. Until people start to see that everything they do is dependent on plants. You know, without these damn things, you're not alive, you are dead. They're the only way of turning sunlight into food. I think that's a really important message to get across to people.
After the heat and humidity of the tropical house, it's a real relief to be able to walk into the temperate house. And this is very, very different in feel. It's much more arid and much more drought-tolerant planting. And also the planting is much more sparse, which is typical of how these plants would grow in the wild. If you're passionate about plants, ecology and the environment, then the Eden project is a must-see. And if you know anyone who isn't, then make sure you bring them with you, because by the end of their visit, they're sure to be inspired.
If you want to propagate your rhododendrons, you can do it the old-fashioned and the easy way by layering. Find a branch which goes down towards the soil, improve the patch of soil immediately beneath it by working in some old potting compost, scrape out a hole and peg down the branch, covering it with more of the composted soil. Within a year or so, it should have rooted.
For vigorous, deciduous woody specimens like Philadelphus, Buddleia and the deciduous viburnums, the buds are about to break. So to keep them nice and compact, make sure you prune hard, down to about 15 centimetres above ground. This will encourage plenty of new shoots and masses of flowers.
It's not too late to plant lily bulbs in containers for summer display. Fill the pot with a gritty compost mixture for good drainage. Choose nice plump bulbs and plant them at least 3 times their own depth. Cover them, water them in, and place the pot in a sheltered spot in the garden, and they'll be in flower by June or July.
There's one plant I can't do without in the garden. It's the sweet pea. Wonderful fragrance and brilliant for cutting, and if you keep cutting it, those flowers keep coming right the way through the summer. New varieties and old varieties, they're both worth sowing. A brand new one called Fandango. Wonderful flowers, flecked with all sorts of contrasting tones on that pale creamy white background. And another new variety, Zoraija Rose, a really rich red. Why Zoraija? Well, it was brought into the grower by one of his customers and named after 3 children, Zoe, Richard and Jack. And an old one, Machucana, dating from about 1700, raised in Sicily with a staggering scent. So grow them all, but whatever you grow, make sure they do have a good fragrance. They also like, when you sow the seeds, a deep root run to start with. And that's why I like using these pots, which come as sort of flat pieces of plastic, and you clip them together like that, and they form these tubes, which have down the side of them grooves which encourage the roots to stretch down and find the coolness and the moisture they so enjoy. They all fit together like this in a little rack, and you can put the soil in. This is a peat-free multi-purpose mix, and just drifting it down into these cells, but don't start getting your fingers in and firming it with them. Instead, once you've evened it out on the top, become a wrapper. Just wrap it twice on the surface of the bench, and that's all the firming it'll need. Then you can push your seeds down into it. Some people soak them for a few hours before they sow. I've never really bothered, and provided you keep the compost moist after sowing, mine seem to come up quite happily. And you can sow 3 seeds to each cell. Space them out between half an inch and an inch apart, and then push them down into the compost for about another half inch with a dibberity posh, with a pencil remarker if you're not. And you do this in every cell so that you end up with a potential forest of sweet peas. When you've done the entire tray, stick a label in. I'm sure as eggs is eggs, you'll forget what variety they were. And then all you need to do is water them in and stand them in a cold frame if you got it. They really just need shelter rather than high temperatures. No cold frame? Put them in a lee of a house wall where it's sheltered. Keep an eye on them, and in a few weeks' time, you'll have a forest of seedlings. That's it for this week.
What are you up to next week?
I've got a feeling I'm here digging.
I think I'm here digging as well.
Oh dear. And plant supports as well.
And slugs, I heard mentioned.
Don't mention slugs. I've been glad with the additional muscle power this week, I'll tell you. Whatever the weather this weekend, enjoy your garden. Ta-da.